Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're diving deep into the mind of a founding father, but not in the way you might expect. We're not just talking about politics or revolution. We're exploring the personal faith of the second president of the United States, John Adams. His spiritual journey is a fascinating story that profoundly shaped his vision for America. So, what did John Adams actually believe? If you were to ask him, he would have identified as a Christian. But his Christianity looked very different from what many of his contemporaries, and many people today, would recognize. Adams was a staunch Unitarian Christian. This is a really key point to understanding him. Let's break down what that means. The central idea of Unitarianism is the unity of God. Unitarians believe in one God, period. This stands in direct contrast to the traditional Christian doctrine of the Trinity, which holds that God exists as three co-equal persons: the Father, the Son Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit. Adams found the concept of the Trinity to be, in his own words, an incomprehensible jargon. He couldn't reconcile it with his reason or his reading of the Bible. He once wrote to his friend and fellow founder, Thomas Jefferson, that the Trinity was an artificial creation, something that early church councils had invented. He believed these Platonic, Gnostic, and Athanasian ideas had corrupted the simple, pure teachings of Jesus. For Adams, Jesus was not God himself, but he was a divinely inspired teacher, the greatest moral philosopher who ever lived. He saw Jesus' teachings, especially the Sermon on the Mount, as the ultimate guide for a virtuous and ethical life. He believed that if people could just follow the core principles of Jesus, love God, and love your neighbor, society would be infinitely better off. The complex theology and rituals that had built up around this simple message were, to him, distractions at best and harmful corruptions at worst. This rejection of mainstream doctrine wasn't just a private intellectual exercise for Adams. It grew out of his upbringing in the Congregationalist churches of New England. These churches were born from the Puritan tradition, but by Adams's time, a major shift was happening. A wave of Enlightenment thinking, emphasizing reason, logic, and individual conscience, was sweeping through. Many Congregationalist ministers and their congregations began questioning long-held Calvinist beliefs like predestination, the idea that God had already decided who was saved and who was damned. Adams found this doctrine horrifying. He believed in free will. He argued that God gave humans reason and a moral compass, and it was up to each individual to choose to live a good life. A just and benevolent God, he reasoned, wouldn't create people just to condemn them. This rational, liberal Christianity was the environment in which Adams's faith took root. He and others like him started calling themselves Unitarians to distinguish their beliefs from the traditional Trinitarian orthodoxy. It was a bold move in a society where religious conformity was often expected. Now, how did these deeply personal religious beliefs influence his public life and his politics? This is where it gets really interesting. Adams' Unitarian faith is directly linked to one of his most powerful and enduring political principles, the separation of church and state. Because Adams had seen how religious dogma could be, in his view, corrupted and used to control people, he was deeply suspicious of any formal alliance between government and a specific church. He believed that conscience was a sacred, private matter between an individual and God. The government had no right to interfere. He famously wrote in the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780 that it is the right as well as the duty of all men in society, publicly, and its stated seasons to worship the Supreme Being. However, he also insisted that no subject shall be hurt, molested, or restrained, in his person, liberty, or estate, for worshiping God in the manner and season most agreeable to the dictates of his own conscience. That was a radical statement for its time. His belief in religious freedom wasn't just for other Christians who thought like him. He extended this principle more broadly. In the Treaty of Tripoli, signed during his presidency in 1797, there's a famous line that reads, "The government of the United States of America is not, in any sense, founded on the Christian religion." This statement shocks a lot of people today, but it makes perfect sense when you understand Adams's perspective. He wasn't saying the nation was godless. He was a deeply religious man who believed the nation's morals should be guided by Judeo-Christian ethics. But he was making a crucial legal and political distinction. He was ensuring the world knew that the United States was a secular government, not a theocracy. It wouldn't force a particular religion on its citizens or let one denomination have special privileges. Its authority came from the people, from a constitution, not from a church. He worried that if one sect, any sect, gained official power, it would inevitably lead to oppression. He'd studied history. He knew about the religious wars that had torn Europe apart for centuries. He saw a government entangled with a specific church as a recipe for fraud, violence, and persecution. This commitment to separating church and state was a core part of his vision for a stable, free republic. He believed that true religion would flourish on its own, through persuasion and good works, without the corrupting influence of government power. And likewise, government would function best when it was entangled up in theological disputes it had no business trying to solve. So, when we look at John Adams, we see a complex figure. He was a devout Christian who spent countless hours studying the Bible. He prayed and looked to his faith for guidance. But he was also a fierce rationalist and a religious dissenter who rejected the central doctrine of most of Christianity. He was a moralist who believed religion was essential for a virtuous republic, but he was also a pragmatist who fought to build a wall of separation between church and state. Understanding his Unitarianism is the key that unlocks this seeming paradox. His faith wasn't about dogma or creeds. It was about reason, morality, and individual conscience. And it was precisely this personal, rational faith that led him to champion a secular government, where all people could be free to follow their own spiritual path without fear. It's a legacy of religious freedom that continues to shape the American experiment to this very day. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this dive into history interesting, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which historical figures' personal beliefs you'd like to explore next. See you in the next video.